Adrienne Sims had been affirmed as Primus just 6 hours after Primus York's death. While she had been a fierce adversary of him in the First Circuit and later a distant successor, her behavior after the incident was decent, respectful, and full of reverence. Her first act was to proclaim 7 days of mourning. The funeral of York was a somber but also huge event. As the first Primus to gain a substantial popularity outside of the Order, York had been an icon and hero for many people in the whole sphere. It was a proof of his influence that, indeed, all 5 leaders of the warring great houses attended the funeral. And while they tried to best avoid each other, they all met with a new Primus and the First Circuit. We should also keep in mind that this was the middle of the Third Succession War. After 80 years of constant attacks, counterattacks, skirmishes, and endless sieges, everyone had lost hope of a swift victory or even the chance of a lasting truce. When Sims now presented herself as a peacemaker and negotiator, the reactions of the great houses were benevolent but muted. In a rather cunning move, she even pressed to canonize Hollings York as a ComStar saint. It was evident that she would never be able to outshine him and replace the glorious image that the inner sphere had of him. But by going above and beyond her duty as successor, she was able to co-opt some of his popularity for herself. By capitalizing on his fame and reputation, it was possible to improve the public opinion of ComStar even after his murder. As already mentioned in the preceding chapter, she was anything but the enemy of Rom. In fact, she viewed the powerful agency as the core and essence of ComStar. And to ensure that not only its loyalty was maintained, but also its status and influence as well, she dismissed the injured presenter Rom Gilbert. His plans of dismantling Rom had even less of a future than he himself. Instead, she named her own brother, Carl Sims, the new presenter Rom. He was tasked with rebuilding the agency to protect the sanctity of ComStar. Something made easier by the enormous increase in Rom's budget that the First Circuit approved. This effort was, besides the continuous glorification of Primus York, the only real project in the first few years of her tenure. 2959, this would change in a way fitting an organization that called itself the Blessed Order. In this year, Primus Adrienne Sims started to suffer from repeating nightmares. The events and actors shown in them were unsettling and horrifying. It became so bad that the Primus deemed it necessary to inform the First Circuit about them. We have an account of one of her first dreams. One night, she had fallen asleep at her desk and was awakened by the ghostly figure of Jerome Blake. The apparition stood next to a map of the inner sphere and pointed to the mysterious space beyond the territories of the current governments. In a chilling voice, he warned her that the only true threat to ComStar lay far beyond the borders of the inner sphere. Of course, the first idea was to take a vacation and professional help to recuperate, but the dreams continued to come. Unsure what to do next, the Primus decided to again inform the First Circuit about them. This time, the nightmare was slightly different. This time it was Konrad Toyama, who appeared to her in a dream, also pointing to a map of the inner sphere. Suddenly, the borders seemed to burst into flames, and strange monsters and beings leapt out from the flames until the whole map of the inner sphere had been turned to mere ashes. The Primus insisted that the visions were prophecies of the future. Soon, opponents of the Primus tried to use these visions to raise questions about her sanity and damage her position inside of ComStar. A foolish idea that betrayed that they did not understood the true nature of their own organization. Inside the Blessed Order, many sided with the Primus and agreed that her dreams were truly a warning from Blake himself. A mystic revelation that not only informed them about the terrible peril they may face in the future, but also it renewed and changed the purpose of ComStar. Primus Sims turned from a mere replacement of Primus York to a holy woman and prophet of her own right. Her power inside the Order was now unquestioned. Motivated by her visions, she decided that it was wrong to face the terror from beyond ignorant, but that ComStar had to gain knowledge about it as soon as possible. For this task, she created a new branch, the Explorer Corps. Their mission would be to travel the unexplored systems of a galaxy, in the deep periphery and far beyond via jump ship. On the way, they would create reports and detailed map about every discovery they made. Planets, asteroids, abandoned installation, and most important, signs of human settlements. It should be a peaceful mission. Neither the jump and dropships nor the personnel were heavily armed. If contact was made, they were to engage in diplomacy and negotiations. The gained information would be shared with the sphere, after securing any relevant technology, of course. A special part of this campaign was the mystery of a long-departed Kerensky Exodus fleet. Primus Sims knew that her visions alone would not be enough to convince the hardened politicians on the First Circuit to approve and bankroll such a huge and far-reaching endeavor. Using Kerensky and his war potential as a possible source of trouble, a non-spiritual argument could be made for it. No one could fathom how correct this worry would be. By 2961, the first ships of the Explorer Corps began to make their way through the vast periphery. Though they did not find the trail of a Kerensky fleet, they did locate a number of isolated and forgotten colonies. Some of the colonists had never learned of the fall of Star League. Others had been formed by civilians fleeing the horrors of the First Succession War. Sometimes the explorers had disastrous contact with pirates, new diseases, or deadly plants and animals, but such risks seemed to make the Explorer Corps all the more romantic for recruiting purposes. Its work also helped to improve the Order's relation with the House leaders when ComStar informed the periphery and House governments of the discovery of some of these lost settlements. The truly frightening thing about Primus Sims' nightmares is that they contain descriptions of characters that were close resemblance of the totem animals used by the clans. The metallic viper of Clan Steel Viper, or the emerald birds of death of Clan Jade Falcon, just to name two. And it should be the actions of the Explorer Corps that made the offsprings of Kerensky's exodus aware of the Ionosphere again. But that was long after the time of Primus Sims. In 2979, she died in her sleep of natural causes. She had never named a successor, leaving the task to the First Circuit. To honor her drive into the unknown, her ashes were scattered in deep space by one of her Explorer jump ships. The next and 10th Primus was Yin Takami, presenter of New Earth. His time at the head of ComStar should right from the beginning start with one of the most bizarre threats that the Blessed Order faced, the Tripitz affair. Just 10 days after his approval, Primus Takami was informed by presenter Rom, Carl Sims, that forces of a Taurian Concordat had discovered a long-abandoned Black Lion-class battlecruiser, the Tripitz, in an empty star system near New Vandenberg. While an ancient relic from the time of the Star League, the Concordat seemed confident and eager to repair and recommission the old warship. 200 years prior, this would not have made a big difference, but the situation had changed drastically. One of the most serious results of the succession wars had been the loss of almost all existing warships. So the discovery of even a single one was enough to completely change the balance and power dynamic in the sphere. Not only because it could be an asset for the Taurians, but also because it could fall into the hands of far more powerful entities with far bigger industrial capacity, like the Capellan Confederation, which was planning their own reclamation mission. Primus Takami was not willing to take chances. He ordered the first division of the ComStar Guards and Militia to rush into the system and completely destroy the Tripitz, denying the prize to all others. The strike force had all its markings removed and the vessels painted completely white. They were under strict orders to avoid any kind of communication during the operation. They just entered the system and immediately attacked the Taurian units protecting the battlecruiser. The resistance was stiff and forceful, but no match against the superior technology of the attacking fighters. In less than an hour, the battle was over. What followed was the swift and utterly destruction of the old warship, before the white force retreated and disappeared without a trace. The Tripitz should soon turn into one of the great mysteries, and it took a schism, a reformation, and an opened archive for the truth to come out. The danger of losing the technology advantage against the houses was one of the driving forces for Primus Takami. The successor states were not staying idle and had continued to regain some of the lost tech that their ancestors used in the past. For him, an admirer of the third Primus, Raymond Karpov, the solution was clear. Operation Holy Shroud had to be renewed and the progress of the house destroyed. A campaign of assassination and terrorism to kill scientists and engineers and to demolish laboratories and research installations. But the times were different now. The great houses had far better intelligence agencies and were able to prevent a multitude of plots to play out. Many targets were saved and could continue their research. It was lucky for ComStar that still no one was able to identify them as a real culprit, and they could carry out some of the missions. But overall, the results were mixed and mediocre, a far cry from the resounding success the original Operation Holy Shroud had been. But the most important change to ComStar under the rule of Yin Takami was the extension of the First Circuit. Since the time of Blake, the First Circuit were always presenters of the most important HPG relay station. It was a position based on the technical proceedings of interstellar communication, not the wider politics outside of ComStar. Takami wanted to change this by fully embracing the political nature of the First Circuit. He proposed to name 4 new members and to change the position of one already existing. One for each of the great houses. These new presenters would represent all HPG stations in the corresponding state, inform the Primus about the politics, and serve as a direct connection to the houses. This was Primus Yin Takami's speech he held to the First Circuit on June 14, 2988. The motion I place before you, esteemed members of the First Circuit, is to realign ourselves, that we may better fulfill the will of Blessed Blake. The First Circuit faces a great threat, not from the weak House Lords, but rather from within. We have deluded ourselves into believing that all we need to do is sit back and wait, and the will of Blake will unfold. That simply is not the case. Our participation in the affairs of the inner sphere is required if our order is to succeed in its holy crusade. But, as it stands now, the First Circuit lacks inspiration and drive. I seek to change that. I propose that we add several new members to our ranks. The new positions I seek are Presenter Tarkat for the Commonwealth, Presenter Xian for the Capellan Confederation, Presenter Atreus for the Free Worlds League, and Presenter New Avalon as the Advocate member of the Circuit for the Federated Suns. I propose also making Presenter Dieron the Advocate of the Draconis Combine. The role of the Advocate member is to speak as counsel to the First Circuit, for each of the realms he or she represents. Thus will this esteemed council act in accordance with the will of Jerome Blake, by fully understanding the impact of our decisions on the various houses of the inner sphere. So it has been proposed. Now I challenge you, the members of the circuit, to take the risk and make a stand on the issue. The future of our order is all that is at stake. It goes without saying that the Primus had to use any political maneuver at his disposal to convince the First Circuit into accepting this plan. The result was a change in the leadership of ComStar, which would determine its course of action for the rest of its existence. The Advocate seats proved to be a double-edged sword. In Primus Takami's time, they were useful in providing ComStar with the insights into the thinking of the various house governments. Over time, these Advocate-Precentors created a majority power base for themselves through their ties to the ruling houses of each successor state. As the Precentors not associated with the house found themselves gradually losing their voice in the direction of ComStar, they eventually stopped attending First Circuit meetings, leaving only the core of house-aligned Precentors in power. Officially, all Precentors administrating the First Circuit HPGs are still members of the First Circuit. In our own day, these advocacy seats played a role in the betrayal of our order. The death of Yin Takami was one of the most spectacular ones in the history of ComStar. In late 2994, the Pride of Blake, the Primus private jump ship, experienced a full engine core overload and meltdown. At that time, the Primus and 2 members of the First Circuit were on board. All 3 perished in the following explosion of the ship. Just as his predecessor, he had failed to name a successor, so the First Circuit decided to give the leadership to the Precenter Alpha C, Al Rosenstein. Looking back, the tenure of Yin Takami represents a decisive change in the behavior and the policy of ComStar. Especially the reform of the First Circuit opened the order to a strong involvement in the affairs of the great houses, and the aggressive actions during the Tripitz affair and Operation Holy Shroud II prepared the way for a far more active ComStar. So, just like Raymond Karpov, who was declared a saint by Takami, marks the end of early ComStar, the Primus Yin Takami marks the end of the Middle Era. Those who had to follow him would belong to the late phase of ComStar's history. It must not be forgotten that Primus Rosenstein's appointment to the First Circuit were the foundation of today's ComStar and Word of Blake. Not only did he name former Primus Sims as the saint of the order, but some of his other appointments, Christopher, Tiapolo, Vandal, would all play key roles in the direction of both our orders.